So welcome, folks. We wanted to talk today about boosting your telehealth practice with GI testing. And this goes back several generations, in fact. My teacher, Dr. Bill Timmons, some of you may be old enough to remember Bill, had an exclusive telehealth, telemedicine practice. Back in those days, we called it a phone practice because there was no internet. And when I was learning how to do functional medicine, I'd drive my little Honda down to Bill's office in San Diego and watch him work every Thursday from noon until about 6. Then we'd go out for tacos, have dinner, and talk about my cases. And that went on for like 6 years. So I learned how to do functional medicine by watching a guy work on the phone. So naturally, when I started my practice, I started working on the phone. I just thought that was like the normal way to do it. And now all of a sudden, it's incumbent upon many of us to do this because a lot of you may have trouble with your patients coming into an in-person clinic, people a little awkward or not comfortable doing that, or depending on shutdowns and whatnot. It's just a great side gig to have a strong telehealth practice. And for some of you like myself, after 10 years of having both a telehealth and an in-person clinic, I sold my in-person clinic and went to be 100% on the phone about 16 years ago. I haven't seen a patient in person in 16 years, have a booming practice, and I love it. It's really low stress, low overhead, and these days, maybe even more important than ever before to have this as an option that's viable as a nice income stream. So I want to talk a little bit about the logistics of doing this and how you can set this up, and then we're going to show some information about lab interpretation and how all that can work as well. So the first part of this, if you're wanting to transition and get into telehealth and you want to have a strong focus on GI testing, which I think we all should because that's the sort of center point of functional medicine, is make sure the GI tract is working well, is to be able to sell a GI test to every new patient. This is not just a test for people that have digestive problems. It's not just a test for people who want to test. It's the foundation of a good telehealth practice is to run a GI microbiome test on every new patient. And if they have an immune-related problem, you should check their GI. If they have a hormone-related problem, you should check their GI. If they have fatigue, you should check it. If they have a skin problem, if they can't get pregnant, whatever the issues are, really, we always want to make sure that the gut and the microbiome are super healthy. And so this is like an essential component. And the telehealth aspect of a practice can help you reach a much broader range of patients, people that might not normally come into an acupuncture or chiropractic clinic, or people that might not want those kinds of services, but are very interested in functional medicine assessments, especially with the popularity and understanding nowadays of how important the microbiome is. So I'll have a couple of steps in order to teach you just some basics on how lab sales can work, especially in the context of a telemedicine or telehealth practice, and understanding too a little bit about why selling the labs is such an important step. And this is right out of the Dr. Timmons playbook. He's like, always said this every week. The quality of your program, the quality of the program you design for this patient is completely dependent on the accuracy and validity of your lab tests. Right. And so a good quality program that's really going to move the needle for a patient has to have good quality lab data behind it. And so we have to, and as awkward as this may be, learn how to sell labs. And if you're not selling labs, then you're not getting the microbiome better. You're not really understanding what's happening. You're going to be doing treatments that are just based on guessing and just not as effective. And patients suffer because of that. So once you sell the lab, almost everybody, 90+% of people, 99% of people are going to come back to get the lab results, right? It's kind of weird to order a lab test and then not look at the results. And then they're going to start a supplement program because they see all the things that are wrong based on the lab. So you've got this sequence of events. The lab leads to a consult to review the lab. That leads to a supplement program. Because once you get a lab back and it shows that you've got this microbiome imbalance and this Giardia problem, everyone's going to want to treat it to get better, right? And so the other thing that I think is equally important, maybe even more important, is that when people buy the labs, they will follow your lifestyle change advice much more diligently than they would otherwise. So when you tell people that they need to change their diet, if there's a lab behind why that should happen, it's much more likely that they're going to listen to you and much more likely they're going to get better faster. So the idea of selling the labs is really more than just about the test. It's about selling this whole program that you're going to offer that includes supplements and lifestyle changes and your energy to get them to be better. And them investing the dollars in the lab is the key that shows that they're invested in them getting better, right? And they're going to work with you on this. And without the labs, compliance falls apart. The idea of them listening to you about lifestyle changes is pretty compromised if they're not listening to you about what tests they should order. And the same with the success of the overall programs in terms of how supplements work. All the odds on things working really drop dramatically if you can't get people to test. So there's 3 simple steps, and hopefully this is enough to at least provoke some thoughts so you can start to think about how this actually works, right? But the first step to becoming this is one of my patients, one of my students. This woman in Ohio. I was teaching a seminar in Ohio a bunch of years ago, and one of the senior doctors in a local clinic brought in her junior doctor, and there's 2 medical doctors in this presentation I was doing, and the senior doctor came up to me and she was like, I don't know what you do in your mentorship class, but every time, someone walks out of Joan's office, they order all the lab tests. And no one else in our clinic is really doing this. And she's like, we call her the lab whisperer. And so I've used that phrase ever since. So I was like, oh, well, that's pretty simple. Joan took the mentorship. I taught her how to sell labs. It's not that hard. Once you get good at this, it becomes just part of your DNA and you just be able to do it over and over and over again. I mean, I've done this maybe 10,000, 12,000 times with patients, right? Over and over, you get good at it. But you got to practice it in the beginning if you're not good at it. Second step, designing supplement programs based on the labs. The third step, prescribing the lifestyle changes based on the labs and the supplements, right? And then eventually getting adherence to all these changes they're going to make internally in their lives and with their families and with their diet and all this. But that's predicated on these levels of commitment that they're making. This is a very easy thing to do these days because you can easily have, call the lab or email the lab and have them drop ship a lab kit right to the patient's home. They can do the samples at home. You can then pick up the phone and call them when the results are back. And this whole thing can, be transacted through the telephone, right? And through Skype or a webinar format, or however you want to do your consults. So first step, understanding that we all primarily, almost exclusively, make our purchasing decisions based on emotion, not on logic. So people buy based on emotional reactions, and then later on they rationalize with logic and their intellect. And this has been highly, highly studied by social scientists for decades. It's very important to many major corporations, right? They want to understand how people and why people buy things. So you don't want to explain the logic of the labs. You don't want to say, well, this GI 360 has like the best microbiome panel, and they've got all this research out of Europe, and you can, that's like all the cool stuff that we learn in the seminars when you're hearing the experts. That's not going to go over most people's heads. You want to really not explain what is exciting to us, but explain what would be exciting to the patient. Is it going to motivate them that, Doctors Data has the best technology out of Europe now and it's Maldive this and that and name all these? No, not really. They don't really care about that. They just want to know why they should do it. How is it going to impact me? What's in it for me kind of thing. Right? So that's the first step. And my first few years of explaining labs, I was always talking about what I was excited about, which was like the technology and the accuracy and the validity and the science behind it. But you want to try to appeal to people's emotions versus their logic and rational scientific part of their mind. So the next step then is to explain and educate them about how their complaints have happened in the first place and how is that tied back to digestion. Remember, step number 1 is just remembering, don't talk to them like they're another doctor, right? Step number 2 is explain to them from a patient perspective how their low energy, that there's their main complaint, might be related to assimilation, digestion, and what to eat. How their concerns over their immune system and is directly related to mucosal immunity, which is very much revealed with this test with markers like secretory IgA and all the commensal bacteria and dysbiotic bacteria. You're really getting a good look at mucosal immunity and the strength of your mucosal tissues in the gut with this test, right? And now if they have an obvious digestive issue, then you of course can go on and talk about, you want to know, I don't know, why are you having so many digestive problems? Is it your microbiome? Is there some kind of GI organ problem? Is there a pathogen? I'm not really sure. We need to do the test to figure this out. But, whatever the issue is, you want to be able to tie it back to the test so you can explain to them why it's worth doing this lab. And then the third step is to tie the physiology that you covered to the labs directly, so that you're always explaining how you can measure and test the digestive system with the lab, and then ultimately get the data you need from the test to correct whatever the problem may be. So mucosal immunity might be a simple example, right? So let's say the person has frequent colds and flus, or they're worried about a lung infection, right? Or they have vaginal yeast infections over again, or they have bladder infections all the time. Then you talk about how mucosal immunity exists throughout the entire body, right? Any mucosal surface tissue, whether it's a vaginal tract or the urinary tract or the sinus passageways, is governed by secretory IgA, and our mucosal immunity is very, very much tied into the immune response in the gut, and that we can test and correct the mucosal immunity and its function in the gut, which will strengthen mucosal tissues throughout the body, strengthen that system. So again, you're picking on their symptoms, maybe recurrent bladder infections, and tying it back to show them how that directly relates to the gut. And these days, with all the research on the microbiome, you can pick any condition from being overweight to having heart disease and tie it right back specifically to organisms in the microbiome and why it's important to test and correct the microbiome to prevent weight gain, heart disease, let alone things like IBS, IBD, and those kinds of things. So if you appeal properly in a very genuine way, not in a salesy kind of way, but in a way like you really care about them, like because you do, right? Then that emotional bond is made. They realize that you really think this is true, that they really need to test their microbiome or their gut, and you're appealing to them on this emotional level. They will buy the test 100% of the time. You'll be like that woman, Joan, in Columbus, Ohio, right, who just became a lab whisperer. People walk out the door, they go right to their front desk and buy the kit. Or in our case here, maybe they get right on the phone and, and order the test kit through the internet, okay, from you. So it doesn't need to make sense, in terms of you explaining the logistics of it and the science behind it. It just needs to feel valuable to that person. It needs to have a value. I was just talking with one of our students yesterday, and she's an acupuncturist, and she's really struggling with how to sell stool kits, and just had a frank discussion of it. She doesn't have the total confidence in that it's worth doing that. She is she hasn't had enough experience to see how effective these programs are. Once you see the value of testing and correcting a person's gut, then I think it becomes easier and easier and easier over time. Okay, so you want to just make sure that you create this value so patients see that this is an essential component. It's not something you can just skip over and go right to some other hormone panel or something, right? And so if you're not selling labs to every patient, it means you're not creating value for them. And you need to think about, just how can this work, and maybe go through some of the things that I'm talking about now, and maybe even read some books about sales and that kind of thing, and get your sort of communication skills, patient education skills to be a little stronger. Now, again, and this is right out of the Timmons playbook, once you do these labs, you're going to have the person come back. They're going to want to do the supplement program. They're going to want to do the lifestyle changes, and you're going to have a patient that's really happy. In fact, in Timmons practice, I do this actually now myself. Finally, I did this. It took me 20 years, but I actually do this now. Is I won't talk where Timmons wouldn't talk. Let's say this, blame it on him. Timmons would not talk to a new patient until they had ordered an adrenal and a GI panel. That was like your prerequisite for walking in the door or getting on the phone with him. And then once he looked at adrenal and GI tests, he would do his new patient consult. He would recommend a lot of other testing and a lot of things to do. But that was just like his bottom line. Like, I don't even really have anything to say to you until I see your adrenal and GI test. Then we can get down to work, figure out what other labs you might want to do and how we're going to proceed with your case. Okay, so again, non-negotiable. We want to do this up front. You will get great results. I'm on the second generation. I've been in practice 28 years. Timmons was in practice probably for 30 years before he died. We've got 60 years of doing this just between he and I. We've got 1,000 people I've trained at the Kalish Institute. This really works from all perspectives. If you're a medical doctor, you're transitioning over to functional medicine. If you're an acupuncturist, you want to add this to your practice. And we just see success with this across the board. And especially now in the era that we're in, as we see a lot of practitioners really wanting to work more on the phone, this is a great thing to do on the phone because you don't have to see a person. They do this test samples at home. The kits get mailed out. You order the supplements, the distribution company ships them the supplements. Is a very easy business model and very effective and can help people quite a bit. All right, so let's take a look at, now let's say you've got the test done. This is a big assumption, right? But you've got like, your 10 new patients a month coming in. They're all doing stool tests and maybe some adrenals or organic acids on top of that too. And now you're wanting to have a really streamlined way to communicate with them about what's going on. And especially when you look at these beasts of tests like the GI 360, there's a massive amount of data on there. There's no way you could explain each one of those commensal bacterial markers to a patient in less than like a year or year and a half, right? First of all, you'd have to go to graduate school probably in microbiology just to be able to get a grip on what all these markers actually mean and then explain it. It's just impossible, right, to explain all that. So you have to come up with summary things. And fortunately, these labs have that for us, right, on their, built into the actual report. There's summary pages and summary graphics that summarize massive amounts of data. So you want to take that summary and then summarize it and bring it down one more notch so you can have an effective phone consultation with the patient. I usually take about 30 minutes to explain a stool test result. And then at the end of that, the last 5 minutes or so, I design their supplement program, and then we're off and running. Okay. You may want to take a little bit more time, but I wouldn't take any less than that because this is an important lab. And, it's usually the first time that anyone's seen what's going on inside their gut. And it's important to really be able to explain all this. So I have it broken down into 3 stages for my own sanity and for my ability to communicate this to patients so that when I grab one of these lab reports, I'm looking at it and thinking, is 1, 2, or 3 going on, or all 3? And then how am I going to explain this to a patient, and then, in which order? So the first stage, right, is that there's something going on with the microbiome. There's the diet, there's the stress levels, the divorce they're going through, the fact they have 3 kids, they're homeschooling all of a sudden. There's a weakening of the stress response, the brain, the adrenal glands aren't doing well, right? Mitochondria maybe are crashing, and then the microbiome starts to fall apart. So that's the first stage for most people. The next phase is that there's something wrong with a GI organ. Something's compromised with an organ. Maybe the stomach's not making enough hydrochloric acid anymore. The pancreas isn't really doing the job on enzymes. The gallbladder is just like, whatever, is not making enough bile. A lot of people have these problems, and these are pretty significant. Or the gut lining is leaky and is not doing really well. There's damage to the gut lining. So at this point, not only is the microbiome tossed around and not doing well, but you've got an actual organ dysfunction. And if that goes on for long enough and your gut's really not doing well, you can either pick up a pathogen, parasite, bacteria, yeast, whatever goes, something can go wrong, or you can have a long-standing old pathogen that's just been lurking in the background all of a sudden flare up. And so if we can break it down to these 3 stages, this is basically the patient communication stuff. This is what I would spend the 30 to 40-minute consult on, is explaining to the person, oh, you've got these 3 different things that might be going on: microbiome, organ related, or a pathogen. Let's dig into this lab and see which of these 3 things is happening and what order we want to treat them. So it gives a mental construct for you and for the patient. So when you're looking at the lab, it's not just sheet after sheet of complex data. You're like looking to find, how's the microbiome? Good, bad. Are the GI organs working? Yes or no? And then is there a pathogen? And of course, then these are the treatments. You're either going to treat the microbiome, treat the organs, or treat the pathogen. So you only really have 3 potential choices for treatments in the broadest sense. Something to tune up the commensal bacteria, microbiome related, something that's going to get one of the organs or a couple of the organs working better, or you're going to go after and try to kill something. Patients really like structure. It's kind of like working with children who just do better when they have a structure, and the kids kind of think that they want it to be open-ended and everything, but really deep down, they look to their parents to provide structure, If you have an unstructured childhood, I don't know, it's like an actor like Robert Downey Jr. is one of my favorite actors of all time. I actually love all his films. He's an amazing actor. But if you listen to him talking about his childhood, I don't know, he was, completely left on his own to do drugs at a very young age, like a 10, 12-year-old kid by his parents. He had no structure, and his life kind of fell apart because of that. So patients need a structure around something as simple as a test so that they can categorize themselves and make sense of this. So And if you don't like the structure, you can make up your own structure. I'm not totally attached to this, but you need some kind of a structure. So the stage one is a disturbed microbiome. How do you even know that's happening? Short chain fatty acids are low. What does that mean? It means that there's not enough of these bacteria lying around there, good guys, to make the short chain fatty acids. Maybe you're not eating enough fiber or something like that, right? Or there's a commensal bacterial imbalance. One of those two things, low short chain fatty acids or commensal bacterial imbalance. Pretty straightforward, right? And you can't really argue with that. I mean, you could say it's more complicated, but yeah, but we're trying to simplify things. So if you look at the labs, you'll see short chain fatty acids. There's a section there. And if they're low, right off the bat, there has to be a microbiome problem, right? Because one of the major roles of these good bacteria is to take fiber and turn it into fat. The fact that that can happen just still blows my mind, that you can have like trillions of these bacteria growing in your intestine and that they grab fiber from like that broccoli that you ate or those beans that you ate and they turn it into fat. That's just kind of weird that that can even happen. But they're clever, aren't they? And they're using this fiber as fuel for their own little bacterial needs. And then they're spitting out as a waste product because they don't want it short chain fatty acids, which are basically fats. And then our intestinal tract is using those fats as a major source of fuel or energy. It's a beautiful arrangement. But if you don't eat the fiber and the bacteria are not there to convert the fiber, then these short chain fatty acids are going to be low. And of course, you could also supply a lot of the companies now, supplement companies now in the last year or so have come out with butyrate. You can actually get butyrate. Well, it's always been around, but it's been in a form that didn't work very well. But there's a newer form of it's around now, so you can actually give butyrate. Or if you want to stick with lifestyle changes, you can use either prebiotics or just fiber or just diet to help correct that. Okay, so on the lab test, there's a summary of all this so that you don't have to study and understand each one of these phylums or phylas and organisms and how Firmicutes relates to the percentage of Bacteroidetes and all this stuff, right? There are these graphics that are pretty easily going to explain to you if the microbiome is in good shape or not. Okay, so we want to thank the lab tech people for figuring this out because lots of time and energy went into generating these. I know the graphic looks like a pretty simple thing, but somebody spent more hours than you could possibly imagine to simplify this so you can see right away. Microbiome problem, bacteria balance, no, it looks like it's low off. Okay, so that's step one. Step two, stage two, is there an organ problem? This seems really kind of clear cut, right? Because it's stomach, pancreas, gallbladder, intestine lining. That's about it. Maybe I'm forgetting one organ, but I think that's about it, right? So is there evidence that one of these organs isn't working well? We had a case this morning in class, and there were gallbladder, stomach, and pancreas problems, all three. I don't know. The student's like, what do I do? I'm like, I don't know. You can give them HCl and some ox bile and some pancreatic enzymes, and maybe that'll fix this, right? So these are really, really important organs. They're not kind of optional. They're essential for us to be able to digest and process our food. So again, on the labs, you will see markers that will tell you, is there an elastase problem that reflects pancreatic issues? Is there something to do with the gallbladder? And it's either a yes or no. Either the marker will be positive, and you know that organ has an issue, or the marker will be normal and you know that that organ is fine. So stomach and HCl was the solution, right? Pancreas, and if there's a problem there, then pancreatic enzymes. And if there's a gallbladder problem, then you want to use a gallbladder support product. Usually they have ox bile in them. And if there's leaky gut markers, you want to do anti-inflammatory and leaky gut repair. So in this second stage, you're working with the actual organs and trying to repair organs. And that's a pretty easy thing to explain to patients. There's also markers for immune function to see if the intestinal tract lining is intact or not, things like calprotectin, inflammatory markers, immune markers like secretory IgA. And if these are off, then you know that there's a problem with the actual intestinal tract lining, either being inflamed or not making enough of an immune response. And this is progressive, right? Microbiome not working well, organs not working well. Now we're like, oh no, there's pathogens, GI pathogens, infections are present. And if the system is weakened enough with the microbiome being out of balance and organs not working well, then either you can have an old infection that flares up that was just lurking there and not causing problems, because you're stressed now, or you could just pick up an infection because your immune response isn't that working well. And then at this point, you have to get a little more aggressive. We don't have to, but usually people want to get a little more aggressive and treat the bug by killing it. Okay? And these are yes or no's, really straightforward. Do you have blastocystis? Yes or no? Do you have Dientamoeba fragilis? Yes or no? Do you have Giardia? Yes. Okay, we're going to treat that. There's not probably too many times where you want to just let someone walk out the door with Giardia and leave it alone. So most of the time, within reason, you're going to want to eliminate whatever infection you find. Okay, so quick summary: we've got these 3 different stages, and they're progressive, right? There's a disturbed microbiome, low short chain fatty acids. That little graphic thing is off, and you'll see they have dysbiosis indicators and whatnot on the labs. There's a second stage. Now there's a problem with the gut organs, elastase being pancreas, fat-related problems being gallbladder, et cetera. Or there's a degradation of the immune response and the intestinal lining is not working well. There's an organ issue. And then third, there may be some evidence of a parasite, bacteria, whatever, something that you want to kill. And some people have all 3 of these going. And then the only question you need to answer then is, which one am I going to treat, or which ones am I going to treat, and in what order? Usually, in my world, I prefer to treat backwards. So starting with the 3, and then do some 2 support, and then fix the microbiome at the end. Some people do it the opposite way. They start by fixing the microbiome and the diet first, then they might support the organs, and then they would only kill a pathogen if they have to. So you can do it either direction. I think it's a little more fun and entertaining for me personally to just kill parasites. I really like to kill things, so I have a personal preference for that. But if you're one of those people who wants to work on the microbiome first, that is awesome and great, and you can treat the stage 1 and then the 2 and then the 3, or you can mix and match these however you want. But if all 3 are present, I usually start with 3 and go backward. Okay. So now, pretty straightforward. Let's show you some examples here. Let's see. I think we're doing pretty good on time. So take a look at this. If you're thinking about this in terms of stages and you're looking at these markers, you're just thinking, okay, how does this fit into what Dan just said? So right off the bat, for a stage 1, we're saying low butyrate or a problem with the microbiome, right? And so you'll see this flagged. The labs will just tell you that the butyrate levels are low, or short chain fatty acids are low, or whatnot. So right off the bat, there's a problem with the commensal or good bacteria. You'll also see again on those the graphic images that the commensal bacteria are out of balance. And then you can also see in this particular case, secretory IgA is low. So now you know that there's organ imbalance in terms of the lining of the intestinal tract and the immune response. So this person right off the bat, is a 1 and a 2. And then they have Giardia and crypto, so they have all 3. So how are you going to kind of untangle all this? In general, I recommend you try to kill the pathogens first and support the gut as much as you need to do that. As soon as you've gotten a grip on the elimination phase, then you start to do the GI organ repair. You get the leaky gut under control, get the secretory IgA to improve or the inflammation to drop, whatever needs to do there. And then as that's kind of progressing, then you really focus on reestablishing a normal microbiome so they don't cycle back and have problems again, okay? And again, these are either yes or no questions. I think it's just a matter of putting them into a category so you have a clear message that you can communicate to the patient and it doesn't come across as being kind of disorganized, okay? So here's another example. Again, just looking for short chain fatty acids. If they're off, you know that there's a problem with the commensal bacteria. And again, if these markers are off, calprotectin, lysozymes, secretory IgA, there's a problem with the organs themselves, right, with the intestinal tract in this case. And then here's an idea with pathogens. So microbiome, organs, or pathogens, those are the 3 big things that we want to look for. And then in terms of treatments, it's really not that complicated, right? Let's take a look here. We've got, what do I call it? I call it from labs to lifestyle. I think that's my little phrase. I like that last year. I kind of stopped saying that. But anyways, the point is that the labs give you an argument for you to sit down and really talk through how you want that person to deal with their lifestyle changes, okay? That's one of the key factors to the labs, is that it gives you that leverage to then talk about the lifestyle changes that you want the person to make. And so number 1, if they're having a problem with their microbiome, then you want to talk about how can you eat in a way that's going to encourage commensal bacterial overgrowth, and how can you eat in a way that's going to improve short chain fatty acid production. What does that boil down to? Increasing fiber in your diet, increasing polyphenols in your diet, increasing fermented foods. And so anyone out there who's a parent, you can raise your hand. I can't see you, but I can just put your hand up anyways. You know, how many times, depending on my kid's 22, he's about to graduate from college in a couple months, which I'm very proud of. He's a biophysics major and he's studying mitochondrial cell growth rate, mitochondrial growth rates inside cells with these high-speed cameras and stuff. It's pretty cool. But anyways, when he was like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years old, like how many times did I tell him to eat his vegetables? Like you can't even count. Once you're a parent, like you just don't even remember. And they're trying to make the broccoli look like a little tree or whatever you did to try to get kids to eat vegetables. So when we just tell people to eat vegetables, they just remember their parents. And very few patients are just going to walk out of your office because you said you should eat more vegetables and start to eat more vegetables. I mean, if they're capable of doing that, they probably wouldn't be seeing you in the first place. So you need to have a reason that's science-based, that's lab-based for them to eat more vegetables, even though they know that they should do that and you know that you should do that. The lab test, if this is the only reason you order stool testing, it's worth it. You can say, oh my gosh, this doesn't look good. Your commensal bacterial levels are low. Look at your Akkermansia. Whew. Short chain fatty acid. I don't know. You don't even have any short chain fatty acids. And they're looking at you like, oh my gosh, what am I? Well, that's interesting. I think you're going to have to start to increase foods that have these nutrients in them, like fiber and polyphenols and fermented foods. So when someone sees a lab test and they're messed up, and then you tell them that they need to change their diet, the odds on them changing their diet go up like by 10 or 100 times compared to you just saying, hey, you look like you need more vegetables. You know, the lab test makes a huge difference in the lifestyle. And of course, functional medicine is all about lifestyle change. So in my mind, the labs are the essential component in getting people to make their lifestyle changes. Now, I also sell and use supplements with every patient on every visit. So I'm not against using supplements at all. So prebiotic powders, prebiotic capsules, whatever you want to do to get the commensal bacteria back up. Probiotics, of course, are essential and much needed. Butyrate you can use directly for really sick patients. The stuff is like a miracle cure. So you have a bunch of different ways you can treat the microbiome, lifestyle and supplement wise, right? And then in terms of organ function, same thing. What's the lifestyle change? Well, your gallbladder, pancreas, and stomach don't look like they're working really well. Let's talk about how your digestion works in the first place. Well, if you're sitting down and you're reasonably relaxed and you chew your food carefully, and don't drink too much when you eat, and you relax for maybe 2 or 3 minutes after your meal, and don't read the paper and don't engage in heated discussions while you're eating, just try to be a little mellow. Then that's going to allow your stomach to make hydrochloric acid, your gallbladder to make bile, your pancreas to make enzymes, right? So the lifestyle change here is just chewing well and relaxing and taking a few minutes after you eat before you jump back and go back to work. Then on the supplement side, it's really straightforward. If there's a stomach problem, we give betaine HCl with pepsin. That stuff is like a miracle cure for a lot of people. Digestive enzymes are off. You use digestive enzymes. GI repair powders, you use glutamine-based powders to get the gut lining to repair. And then one of my favorites these days is gallbladder support because that gets missed a lot. They have a gallbladder problem, you promote, help that. That'll help dramatically with the digestive processes and a lot of different symptoms. So, combining some aspect of treating the organs, super important. And then the third stage is thinking about lifestyle changes. You have to usually get into more extreme diet changes, more than just chewing your food well, right? If they have like a major yeast overgrowth and giardia, you may need them to do a special diet, like a gluten-free diet or something like that. And you're, almost always going to want to use antimicrobial herbs to knock things out. There's combination products that all these companies have that are helpful. There's single ingredient products. I usually use a combination of both. So the way that Dr. Timmons taught me was to use one central combination product that has, 3 to 6 different ingredients in it that are antimicrobials, and then to back that up with 1 or 2 single ingredient products like oregano or artemisia. So you have this combination effect of 2 or 3 antimicrobial supplements at the same time at a very hefty dosage and just knock out whatever bug is there. And then, of course, in some cases, you may want to use antibiotics if they're really sick and they have giardia or something like that, and they're having diarrhea 9 times a day, maybe that they want to use a prescription. So when you're thinking about this, right, microbiome, organs, and then pathogens, what protocol do you want to use and in what order? And so I think I've seen this sort of, what do you call it, like trajectory or curve in a way, where when you're younger, and this is me in, 29, 30 years old, like, wow, are you kidding? You've got cryptosporidium. Let's just nuke it. This is like, let's just get rid of that thing. It's kind of like the folly of youth. You just like jump right in and like, yeah, let's just go for the most important treatment here. Let's get rid of it. However, as you watch practitioners age and mature, you sometimes see that they take a more 30,000-foot view and they realize, well, you have cryptosporidium, but are you chewing your food well? Do you have enough butyrate in your system, propionate, whatever, And they're starting to look at the lifestyle factors and the diet more and seeing that this cryptosporidium is a problem because of all these things that are going on. And so I think a lot of people, as they get more experience, start to do less and less aggressive treatment and more on the lifestyle coaching side. As I mentioned earlier, I have maintained my boyish charm in this regard because I still like to kill things, but I understand people who want to start with more basic issues like chewing your food and that kind of stuff. Also, I get a lot of patients that have already done all that. They've already done every diet known to humankind, and they're organic everything, and they're just looking for a more lab-based solution. So that's kind of what I'm known for in terms of my practice. The other things that if the patient has really severe symptoms and they're having diarrhea 9 times a day, you probably do want to kill the Giardia right away and not wait around. There's also cost to consider. Some of the supplement protocols can be more expensive than doing the lifestyle changes. Sometimes patients are just like, yeah, like I had a patient this afternoon. She has H. pylori and her 2 kids have H. pylori. One's like 6 and one's 11. The whole family has horrible stomach problems. And the mom's like, can we just do this now? Like all 3 of us, just get rid of the H. pylori? I'm like, yeah, good. So she was in a rush. She wanted to just deal with it and get the family cleared up. So we went for it, So the more aggressive protocols, like the stage 3, where you're doing the pathogen treatments, everything goes a lot faster. If you're going to work on the microbiome and the diet and fiber and those kinds of things, it should probably take a little bit longer. So some of it may depend on your experience and your enthusiasm level, as well as what's going on with the patient. Okay, so I want to show a couple of cases here, and then we'll open it up for questions in just a few minutes. And let's just zip through this. Hopefully this is starting to seem a little redundant and easy. Maybe you're even getting a little bored. If you're getting bored, then I'm doing my job. So case 1, is there a microbiome, organ, or pathogen problem? So right off the bat, just look at this and you can see Salmonella, Giardia, Citrobacter, Klebsiella. Pretty clear that there's some pathogens involved. Okay, so there's a stage 3 there for sure. Secretory IgA is high, so there's a stage 2 for sure. And then we go on here. And again, you're looking for microbiome imbalances, organ imbalances, or pathogens. And look at the next case here. Blasto is observed, so there's a pathogen. Secretory IgA is low, so that there's organ involvement, right? The gut lining is not working that great. The immune system in the gut lining is a little off. Butyrate is low. Short-chain fatty acids is very low. So right off the bat, and then there's a couple of these bacteria that are low. So they've got a microbiome problem because the butyrate and short-chain fatty acids are low, and some of the bacterial markers are low. That they've got an organ problem because the SIG-A is low, and then they have a couple of organisms that you may want to kill. So do you want to start by doing the microbiome with fiber, prebiotics, probiotics, or do you want to start by killing the blasto and candida? And then another super helpful thing, and I look at this every time I see one of these labs, is the this dysbiosis index score there, right? Where they're taking, again, this massive amount of data on these bacterial markers and summarizing it based on these scientific studies to let you know, is there something that I should really eradicate there? Or can I just let this go and get away with just doing a stage 1 treatment? Okay, so it's very, very helpful to have that as well. And again, the organisms are easy because they're there or they're not, right? The microbiome analysis is relatively easy because you can look at things like the commensal bacterial markers and the graphic images that they provide to let you know if there's a problem as a summary, as like the computer algorithm, right? And then just simply looking at the short chain fatty acids. So right off the bat, you're getting a pretty good sense of microbiome health, pathogens, and then starting to think about if there's organs involved or not. Okay, so again, the index score here, quite low, looks pretty good, right? You look at the actual organisms, there's one or two things that are present that are not that great, that shouldn't be there. There's some of the good organisms that are low. So there's a little bit of a microbiome problem. You can see like Faecalibacterium puznitzii is low. The Clostridia class is low. That's the good Clostridium, not the bad ones. Firmicutes is low. So this is a suppressed or depressed or underrepresented microbiome, right? With a little bit of an overgrowth present. So this might be someone where you'd want to really go after the prebiotics, probiotics, fibers, butyrates, and just tune that up and see if that's enough to kind of flip things around. The argument that a lot of doctors make for that treatment is that, hey, if you get these commensals back up to normal, the Clostridia class, Faecalibacterium puznitzii, if all these guys come back up to normal, you're going to no longer have a problem with the dysbiotic bacteria and some of these other infections. So why not fix this underlying problem of the microbiome first? That's the argument for doing it that way. You can be very successful. And in fact, with some of my really, really, really extremely ridiculously sick patients who respond poorly to every supplement and respond poorly to every treatment and are just barely hanging in there because of their gut, I find that doing the stage 1 treatment for the microbiome is the most effective by far, because they couldn't handle medications or antimicrobial herbs to clear out the infections that they may have. And so you're stuck for maybe the first 6 months or a year just working on tuning up their microbiome, and they're getting healthier and healthier because you're doing this super basic program. So sometimes, ironically, the sickest patients do the best with the simplest programs. It's kind of opposite of what you might think, all right? All right, I'm going to stop right there. And let you guys know we have a GI masterclass that I developed, which you can pick up for $49 if you're interested. And it goes into a lot more detail on what we're talking about today, if you guys are interested in expanding your communication and interpretation skills. And then I'm going to let it open up and see if any of you guys have questions in the last few minutes here, okay?
Yeah. Hi, Dan. Do we have questions? We've got tons of questions, but really quickly before we jump into the questions, I want to make sure everybody out there knows that Doctors Data account reps are available via phone, Zoom, or email to help all of you get started with this test. We're going to post in the chat a way for you to get in touch with them. So those guys are there to support you. But Dr. Kalish, let's get started with questions that have come in. Okay. We've got a couple of questions about your retesting protocol. So it looks like we've got 2 of them here. Let me ask them both and then you can answer them. Are you retesting to determine when you move to the next step of treatment? And then additionally, oops, sorry, there's my video. And then additionally, how do you typically test to confirm that you've killed all the pathogens? Do you look at symptom improvement, or are you doing additional stool tests to monitor progress before you move between stages?
That's a good question. Okay, so testing and retesting is the heart and soul of functional medicine. Kind of like bass and drums and guitar are the heart and soul of rock and roll. Like if you went to a rock and roll concert and there was no guitars, you'd be like, oh, that was a little weird. Like the guy played piano the whole time. That's kind of lame, right? So you got to test and then you got to retest, because the retest is how you know that it worked, or more importantly, how you know that it didn't work. And if you base your decision on whether things work or don't work on how people are feeling, you're in some serious trouble, right? Like, I don't know why I keep thinking about kids. Do you have kids?
I do.
Have you ever told them something that they didn't want to hear and they got mad, but you had to tell them, right? Like, you can't just raise children by telling them what they want to hear all the time. Yeah. And so, like, if you just ask people how they're feeling about what you're saying, half the time people are just going to exaggerate how good they feel because they just want to make you happy. They'll be, oh, I feel fine. My digestion is fine. So the only way to really ascertain what happened is to retest. So the question then is, when do you want to retest? And you don't want to over test people because they'll get frustrated. And you certainly don't want to test them too early because then the tests will look the same, right? So in general, if they have a pathogen, you want to treat the pathogen. Usually it's for 1 or 2 months. You then want to wait at least 60 days to give them time for the bug to come back and time for you to do the gut repair or organ treatments or microbiome or the other treatments you want to do. And so then retesting typically starts around the 4-month mark from when you first did the test. But hopefully you've gotten through the pathogen treatment and maybe 1 or 2 other phases of the treatment before you do the retest.
Okay. Do you have a comment about what your favorite butyrate products are? And then they go on to say, do you prefer oral or enema for administration?
Oh, can I talk about companies? Is that okay?
This is not CME, I don't think. So
okay. So yeah. Everybody just came out with butyrate, all right? Pure Encapsulations was first. Douglas Labs came out with it. Designs for Health has it. And there's this one independent reseller, Steve Wright. I mean, you guys know Steve from the old days of SCD Lifestyles. So there's like 4 places you can get butyrate now. Now, the thing that's different about the new butyrate, and this stuff is mind-blowing, is back in the day, it was, the older forms of it, before about a year ago, were not absorbed at all, really. Like I think 80-90% of it was destroyed in the stomach. And so people went to horrible lengths to try to get butyrate delivered. Now, all these companies have butyrate. The vast majority of it survives the stomach acid, gets into the small intestine, and hits the large intestine. And we're seeing results with that butyrate that's just phenomenal. I'm only using it with really sick patients. I wouldn't use it with a average kind of patient because it's a pretty powerful product, but it works like pretty phenomenally well for chronic diarrhea cases, cases where you're just trying to get control over symptoms enough so you can get some of these treatments started. It's a pretty profoundly effective product. And I don't know, I think amongst those companies, from what I can tell, the type of butyrate that's now available in this last 12 or 18 months is about the same. Whoever's got it in stock. It seems to be selling out with everybody. A lot of people have it on back order now.
How can you tell when to avoid fermented foods?
Oh, that's easy because people will tell you right away if they try it and they feel poorly. Then you want to back right off. And that's an argument for, well, if you're starting with the stage 1 and you're going to use fermented foods, probiotics, prebiotics first, you're more likely to run into potential problems. People may react poorly. If you're going in reverse order and you're doing pathogens first, then dealing with the gut organs, by the time you get to those foods, the person's mostly better. So there'll probably be less chance that they'll be reactive.
Right. Oh, I like that. How do you correlate serum IgA levels to findings in stool?
I have no idea. I really don't. No one's ever asked me that before. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I'm not sure.
Okay. Here's a question more just about your telehealth visits. How do you manage the physical assessment portion of these telemedicine visits?
So every client I work with is required to have a local physician that does all local exams. They've always got to be cleared for, safety purposes, right? If they have, Crohn's disease or something, they have to have a local GI doctor that's taking care of all that. And then I'm just an ancillary service that's providing functional medicine testing in a very specific niche, but I'm not even trying to, provide other services. And in fact, kind of require that everybody has a local medical doctor that they've seen for the condition that I'm working with them on. And just for general health purposes, they have, a yearly exam that all happens with a local internal medicine doc or family doc or GI doc or whoever it may be.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How useful or futile is it to consider, for example, candida and some species of Clostridia's effects on neurotransmitters?
Wait, say that again. I didn't quite follow that last part.
How useful or futile is it to consider, for example, candida and some species of Clostridia's effects on neurotransmitters?
Well, I think I know what they're asking. So for sure, gut overgrowth of bacteria or yeast that's harmful often has a direct and negative impact on the brain. It causes inflammation in the brain. It creates this whole kind of rush of kynurenate and quinolinate, which you can measure on organic acids, and you see the brain is starting to become inflamed, oftentimes from a digestive tract problem. And then you get overproduction of these excitatory agents, right, that are, what do you call it, neurotoxic or neuroinflammatory. Mm-hmm. And that can make people anxious or depressed or whatever it may be. But there's a huge impact of these gut microbes on brain function. Huge. Like we had can I tell you this case study like last week? This is a true story. So one of our students, Lars, is this medical doc in Germany, and he's been in the class for maybe 6 months. He's really into functional medicine, like he's testing every patient. And he had a 5-year-old autistic child. This is a true story. It just happened last Tuesday. 5-year-old autistic girl in Germany. And he did a GI test, a basic little microbiome tune-up, and a gluten-free diet. And the kid started talking for the first time in her life. The parents didn't think that she could speak. And he's telling this story in class last week. And I started crying. I'm like, are you serious, Lars? He's like, yeah. he's like 6 months into his functional medicine career. And he didn't cure this kid's autism. I'm not saying that, but he made a really big difference by just clearing up her gut. And for the first time in her life, this little girl is speaking to her parents. That's a once in a career kind of moment. I've had a few moments like that myself in the last 30 years, but to see Lars go through that and then to have all the students on the call hear it, everyone's like, wow. And not that we're doing miracle cures. I don't want to say that because you don't want to promise people things or anything, but if you do enough of this testing, you will have experiences like that, hopefully at least once in your career, where something incredible happens because you took the time to test a little kid's gut. And then the reason why I'm even mentioning this is that the $300 or $400 that people spend on these lab kits is absolutely meaningless compared to if you get one kid in your whole career that couldn't speak to start to talk, it's worth all that money that everyone spends on the kits, right? So the cost of the lab kit being a barrier just to me is so frustrating. It would be like I don't know if you're into cars, but it would be like if they weren't doing Formula One races because it costs so much to build the engine. It's like, that's ridiculous. Everybody wants Formula One throughout the whole world. It's like the most popular sport. So a little bit of money to make this thing happen, you should just not hesitate. That's why I started off with the how to sell lab kits, because I'll bet you $1 million every doctor on that call that heard Lars speak about this patient is out doing stool tests on everybody now, and not that you're not going to say, I can cure autism. That's not true. And you're not going to say, maybe your kid will start to talk again, because that's a once in a career kind of thing. But you want to have that confidence to know that the microbiome really, really matters, and not in a peripheral way, but in a central way. I think that's the key message, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you're doing GI stool testing, does a patient need to be off of probiotics for a certain amount of time before testing? Julia, you might want to chime in with the recommendations from Doctor's Data, but Dr. Kalish, do you have any particular recommendations?
I mean, you guys know more about that than I do. I always say 2 or 3 weeks, but I'm not sure what do you guys say?
That's exactly what we say. Okay. Yeah, so that's great. Okay, now the next question. Stage 1 is adrenals. So I know testing adrenals is important, but if a patient won't start with both tests, is starting with just a stool test going to be beneficial? So I think if a patient is not willing to do adrenals and stool at the same time, if you just started with stool, do you feel like that'd be beneficial?
Okay, we've got to really think this through, right? Because why are these GI problems happening in the first place? How much is lifestyle and stress playing a role in that? Like a lot. For this 5-year-old autistic kid, you skip the adrenal testing, go right to gut, right? But for an adult who's been stressed for a long time, if you skip the adrenal test, but basically that means you're not going to have the opportunity to correct the HPA axis, you're going to not have as much information as you want about stress reduction, meditation, sleep, exercise, diet changes, all the things that you can learn from an adrenal panel. So you're kind of limiting yourself in terms of the lifestyle changes if you skip that. And so if the person can only afford one test, I always have them do the adrenals first and let them know, hey, if this program is not changing your life in the next month or two, we need to do this next test here right away. which is a stool test. So I try to stay to the sequence and not go out of sequence as much as possible.
Right. Okay. Please discuss dysfunctions of the small intestine and transverse colon, how they manifest, like signs and symptoms, and treatments.
Does that mean SIBO, or is that a little different? What do you think?
Potentially, but transverse colon makes me think it'd be a little bit broader than that. But you could start by your thoughts about SIBO.
Well, I guess there's two ways to answer that. One is that some organisms, will in fact or cause problems just in the small intestine, some just in the large intestine, some span both organs. I don't have that whole list memorized, but you can look that up anywhere probably. And the symptoms in general, the higher up that the problems are, if the person has symptoms after they eat, in general, the general rule is the higher up in the GI tract that the organ problem is, the more quickly after they eat, they're going to have a problem. So if someone eats and then within an hour, they're having all kinds of bloating and horrible problems, it's probably in their stomach, maybe gallbladder. If they eat and then a few hours later, they're having horrible problems, more likely it would be down further in the small intestine. And I don't know, and then I guess the big thing is to differentiate in my mind between the different small or large intestine. Is the large intestine is where all the real action is happening, in terms of the commensal bacteria. The small intestine is just kind of a warm up for what's happening in the large intestine, in terms of the commensals at least, and how they grow out, right? The whole proliferation and growth is just massively accelerated when you're in an anaerobic environment in the large intestine. But the small intestine has its own sort of personal problems, right? With yeast overgrowth or SIBO type problems or peristaltic contraction issues. But I don't know at that point, I don't really break it out so much separately, but you can, if you want, and look at it's a Giardia infection, so it's primarily small intestine, or it's a E. histo infection. Oh, that's probably more in the large intestine. You certainly can do that if you want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. We just had a question come in asking if these labs can be performed on children. The answer is yes. Okay. What's the difference between the result observed versus cultured in the blastocystis and Giardia? I don't know if this is something maybe that Julia wants to jump in to answer it. Maybe Dan, you can answer it, but
yeah, let's let Julia handle that one. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, so great question. So for the blastocystis and the Giardia, those are parasites. And so the parasite of Giardia is very common. It's one of the top 3 common bacteria parasites. So it is identified via PCR technology, looking for the DNA on one portion of the test, and then also via the 3-day sample on page 6. So GI 360 combines the state-of-the-art testing methodologies in one test. So this is one example where you will see that in 2 places.
Great. Thank you, Julia, for jumping in. Let's see. There's so many great ones here. How long would you have a patient stay on colostrum if you find low secretory IgA?
Yeah, that's a bet. Do you want me to really tell you what I think? It is so hard to get secretory IgA to be better. I don't know what your guys' experience is. Maybe I'm missing the boat on that one, but I don't even try anymore, I don't know. I don't want to be all depressive about it, but it's really hard to get SIG-A up. I may be missing the boat on that somehow. So, I mean, at least many months, 6 months or longer, at least, maybe a year or 2. I used to use SIG-A a lot as a way to track progress, and it was just so frustratingly slow to change. And I found that so many people were 100% improved, and yet their SIG-A was still lagging behind, that I just stopped using it as an indicator of how much better the person's gotten. It just seems to take a while. I mean, you'll see complete symptomatic corrections, and the SIG-A is still low month after month after month. That's just been my personal experience with it, but I may be missing something there.
So when you think about, I mean, outside of secretory IgA, but moving from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, one way or the other, we have a question about a typical timeline you might expect in the movement between stages.
Oh, can be, months or decades, depending on the person. Really?
Okay. Okay. We're running out of time. Maybe we can squeeze in a few more. How often do you feel the need to move on to SIBO breath testing if the patient is not responding to the treatments based on the GI 360 test-related treatment plan?
Maybe once or twice a year in my practice. So maybe 1 or 2 out of 100. Happens, not too often though.
So Julia, you might be able to answer this as well as Dan. This provider heard our guidance to discontinue probiotics for 2 weeks. Does that also mean you need to withhold prebiotics like fiber in the couple of weeks before the test?
Yeah, good question. I can chime in there. So with regards to prebiotics like soluble fiber, if you are doing a large dose supplement every single day, then you can avoid that if you want to get information about the intrinsic microbiome. But if it's a regular diet where somebody's eating a good amount of prebiotics, we do recommend to continue with the diet as usual. So you can see the gut that is the everyday diet induced gut. If that makes sense. If there's anything Dan wants to add.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll end with this final one. Do you have any favorite anti-candida approaches, products, treatments?
I don't know. I think they're almost all interchangeable. If you're using a good company, honestly, I don't think the Metagenics versus the Pure versus the Designs products are that different if you get a good, solid anti-candida killer. I mean, the scientists said those companies are all about the same sophistication and dedication level. They just slam together the best products they can. So I've switched between companies over the years, and I haven't seen a huge difference. Like there's one that's dramatically better. I think usually what happens is as you get older is you just kind of get used to using one thing, so you just stick with it because it works. But that doesn't mean that those companies all have, and I know all these people, right? I meet with them all the time. It's just like your company. I mean, the science people are all like top notch, and they're just doing the best they can possibly. So all those formulations are really good, and I think they're almost interchangeable, really, to be honest.
Yeah, and I will just note there's the susceptibility testing that you get as part of the GI60 profile will sort of highlight which components of these anti-candida products might work best in a particular patient. So I like to use that to also help guide my choices.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. Yeah.
All right, so that's it. So everybody can see here info on Dr. Kalish's masterclass, and the follow-up email will also have links to that information, and it'll also be in your slides. So you'll definitely be able to reference how to join his masterclass. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. And thank you, Dr. Kalish, for your presentation. We always really appreciate hearing from you. So as a reminder to everybody watching, we'll be sending out a link to the recording of the webinar in the next few days, and the link to the slides will be there as well. And I hope all of you can join us for our next webinar, which is on December 2nd at 9:30 and 12 p.m. Pacific time, where Dr. Laura Neville will be presenting neuroendocrine testing and patient support, frequently asked questions. So please check your email or doctorsdata.com to register and learn more. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Good night.